Everywhere you look, the Christian faith is under attack. Governments cater to radical Muslims, but Christians are fair game. It seems the world has gone topsy-turvy, and many ask the question, is God really in charge? Today, Erwin Lutzer traces some blatant attacks on Christians, but then takes us to the Bible for the assurance that despite all we see around us, God is still in control. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, Erwin Lutzer begins a series on what happens when God shows himself. The first display of God's control of all things is shown in Psalm 2, when the Son is crowned.
Well, did you know that there is a war going on, even in America, against Christianity? Are you aware that groups like the ACLU want to criminalize all public expressions of Christianity wherever it is found? I read a book just about that recently, in fact, within the last 3 weeks. One example of hundreds that could be given, a man in a workplace, there was a poster advertising gay rights events and homosexual activities. So in his workplace, in his cubicle, he put some verses of Scripture, and for that he was fired. This was not China, this was not Canada or Sweden, this was Boise, Idaho. The Ninth Circuit of Appeals said an employer need not accommodate an employee's religious beliefs if doing so would result in discrimination against his co-workers or deprive them of contractual or other statutory rights. Goodbye. Dozens of examples of that. And then you think of Montana. Ain't much going on in Montana, huh? A man who owned a convenience store sold all kinds of awful pornography, and then he was gloriously converted, and he took out all the pornography and he put up Bibles for sale and gave out tracts to anyone who wanted them. The Human Rights Commission filed a complaint that he had a hostile work environment because of the Bibles. Somebody would have complained about the pornography. That's just his First Amendment rights. Canada, remember that good country of Canada? How well do I remember Canada? Pastor by the name of Mark Harding objected to the school in his district giving out copies of the Quran to all the students and giving the Muslims their own room to pray in during school hours. He objected because he said, if you're going to do that for them, you should at least give out Bibles too, so that we're fair here. For that, he was indicted. The Supreme Court of Canada did not defend him. He was given 2 years of probation, 340 hours of community service that he has to perform in a Muslim center, and all that because he thought that there should be equality. And furthermore, he received 3,000 letters and emails, many of them death threats, and when he went to trial, he needed police protection because an angry group of Muslims was shouting, "You rebels will burn in hell." So he needed protection, but that was not hate speech. His was, and that was the consequence, and that's the great dominion of Canada. There's so much that I could tell you about this that you wouldn't even want to hear. Maybe in a different context I'll get an opportunity to do that. Anthony Brown, who's an atheist. Sometimes we don't expect support from atheists, but sometimes it comes our way, even from them. He has done research on the whole business of persecution, and he wrote an article that was really eye-catching. He says that 300 million Christians are threatened with violence and discriminated against throughout the whole world, especially in places like Saudi Arabia. And in Indonesia, 10,000 Christians, he says, have been killed by radical Muslims. 10,000 Christians. And the interesting part of the article, he says that no other religion is being persecuted like Christianity. It is the one religion that is being attacked all over the world. That's what comes from the research of an atheist. Well, I need to ask you this question. Is God indifferent to all of this? Is God saying to himself, you know, I've created a world and these human beings, and they're out of control, and I don't know what to do about them? No. God's not indifferent as a result of what is happening on this planet. The text today is Psalm 2. Psalm 2. It's a marvelous psalm that reminds us of the fact that God is in control. Actually, this psalm can be divided into 4 different paragraphs or 4 different sections. And really what you have is 4 different voices that are speaking in this psalm. And we're going to look at those voices one by one. And we're going to see what God is doing about his world. First of all, in verses 1 to 3, you have the voice of the nations. It is a voice of rebellion. The question is asked, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. The voice of the nations, rebellion. They're plotting. They rage. And they're raging against God. First of all, they are plotting together. You'll notice the text there in verse 2. They take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Now, this was really fulfilled when Jesus was here on earth. Because the Herodians, the followers of Herod, and Pilate, they did not get along well. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, these various groups, all had their individual differences and they had their wars between each other. But when it came to crucifying Christ, they said, let us get together to do it. That's what the book of Acts says. They conspired together to have Jesus crucified. I'm not saying that there's a gigantic, wide world conspiracy against Christianity, but it is fed from an underground stream.